10 years ago, Formula One felt like it was a shrinking sport. The stands weren't that full. The age range of people who actually watched F1 was rising and therefore shrinking because they're kind of like dying. And people didn't really know what F1 was about. I mean, it wasn't really talked about and it wasn't really at the forefront of motorsport news, let alone news in general. Not to mention that outside of Europe, F1 just wasn't something that really got talked about. Over time though, especially in the last couple of years, F1 started to look at its own image and decided that something needed to change. And it needed to change soon. Sure enough, with a mixture of time, opportunity, and money, a sport that was originally propped up by the ultra elite eventually found its way into the minds and homes of young racing fans around the globe. I mean, races were starting to sell out months, even years in advance for some races, and everyone was talking about the next race that was happening in Abu Dhabi or in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia or in Brazil. I mean, it was just everywhere. And it was kind of hard to explain what happened. I think the craziest part, honestly, about the boom of Formula One was that out of nowhere, everyone had a favorite driver, and it most of the time had nothing to do with their actual ability to drive, and it was just purely based on the fact that they also like Labubus, or they just happened to have a cool sounding name like Carlos Sainz. I mean, like, you had people who literally could have nothing to do with racing years prior, all of a sudden ensconced and in a trance about the rivalry between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen from, what was it, like 2018 to 2022, like the tail end of Mercedes dominance. Like, the explosion was very palpable. And all that change, all that movement, all that drama begs the question, what happened? Like what did the people at the FIA and Formula One and like the teams and the driver, like what did they do to create so much like boom? Well, the answer lies in marketing. See, this change that I'm describing, it didn't happen overnight. It was intentional, it was planned, it was gradual, but it was changed nevertheless. I mean, like, for decades. I started watching Formula One in high school, and I can remember then that Formula One, it was cool to watch, but it didn't have the same glitz and glamour that the NFL did. I mean, like, it was a sport that, like I said, was very entertaining if you were into cars, but it didn't have that universal, I'm not even interested in sports, but this is a cool thing to watch edge to it, if that makes sense. Like, if you were any kind of locked into F1 back like 10 years ago, you knew like the teams were legendary. I mean, you had McLaren, you had Mercedes, you had Red Bull that started in 2009 with Christian Horner and Adrian Newey. Well, I didn't start with Adrian Newey, but Adrian Newey eventually took it over and made, honestly, what it is today. You had amazing historic drivers. You had Lewis Hamilton. That Nico Rosberg rivalry was crazy. Like, you had all Max Verstappen, all these big drivers come out, but they weren't popular in the sense that they are today. The same way that people so easily at like a sports bar will start discussing the rivalries between, like, I don't know, the Niners and the Rams. They weren't talking that same way about rivalries like Max Verstappen versus Lewis Hamilton, or Lewis Hamilton versus Nico Rosberg, or like the crazy, 2008, 2009 finish with Lewis Hamilton literally winning the Drivers' World Championship on the last turn, as he took out, I think he went from P5 to P4, and Ferrari was like already celebrating in their paddock, and they had to cancel the celebrations with Felipe Massa because he thought he'd won, and they had to tell the Ferrari people like, nah, dude, you didn't win. Like, Lewis Hamilton just got the bag. And it's funny too, because like outside of like really stunning finishes like that, because there wasn't as much glitz and glamour in F1, the races, honestly, like I said, unless you're really interested in cars or just racing and motorsport in general, the races could get pretty boring. But you don't have to take my word for it, right? Like, in 2016, they reported an average viewership of about 429,000 people over the course of those 13 races that they had that season. But in 2024, the average viewership over the course of the entire F1 season was 1.1 million. That's almost double in a little under a decade. The other thing that kind of hampered the development of F1 and bringing it to the forefront of pop culture was that broadcasting rights were kind of weird. I mean, you had like different companies that, kind of like how the NFL is, took stake and claimed different races, and sometimes like the entire deal would almost like fall through and you get these weird drops in coverages where like some races you had to have this really esoteric subscription, or like cable was a bigger thing back then, so you had to be like subscribed via cable to like the right media network. It was weird. And on top of the struggles that they had with broadcasting the races, the drivers also weren't really that interesting. I mean, drivers were interesting in that they were race car drivers, but as far as their personalities were concerned, F1 drivers weren't really pressured at that point in time to try and show the world who they really are. Not to mention that unless you really understood how Formula One worked, you never really knew what races were like meant for, like what certain things they did during the race, like why they were doing those things. And so it just became like a big thing of like, okay, well, I'm watching cars go around, but functionally, what's the difference between this and NASCAR open racing? Some of that complexity was actually just baked into the sport. Like it wasn't even that like there was this air of complexity, but it was actually really simple. Like, no, F1 actually is kind of complicated, right? Like you have, like each car makes about 1,000 horsepower, and they're driven by a 1.6 liter V6 engine, if I believe. And over the years, there have been different regulations, and you know, we had KERS, kinetic energy recovery system, and then we had ERS, which is just energy, or I think it's just energy recovery system, which is like all under braking. And then they moved to like an MGU-H, and then now this year they've done away with the MGU-H, and then they invented DRS, but then now this year they're getting rid of DRS. Like there have just been a lot of different regulations that you've kind of had to track. Luckily, regulations kind of follow waves, and I think the last wave of regulation was 2018 to 2025, which is arguably part of the undoing of Mercedes dominance, but that's for a different video. But yeah, like there are a lot of different little things that you have to track in F1 to kind of make it all make sense and like understand why certain teams always seem to win, certain teams always seem to lose, looking at you, Haas and Aston Martin, and why some teams don't really fit into either category, like Williams, where like one season they'll be in the same regulation era, one season they'll be like, and then the next season they're like, but then they come out with like a random podium at Catalonia, and you're like, I didn't see that coming. And that's just like the car itself. That's not getting into even like driving. Like just like the same exact way, if you talk to an average NFL fan and you ask them what a T-step is, they're gonna be confused. If you ask an average F1 fan what is trail braking, they're gonna be confused. There's so many more granular details about the sport that as you learn them, you gain an appreciation for it. But because it is like so engineering focused, and there's a lot of information hidden behind technicality and like engineering jargon that you may or may not know, I think overall it's just made F1 a kind of hard sport to follow until recently. And I say recently because in 2017, which is, oh my gosh, almost 9 years ago, almost a decade ago, wow. Anyway, in 2017, Liberty Media purchased the broadcasting rights to F1. And this was a big deal because Liberty Media was a company that saw F1 for being something more than just racing. Like they saw F1 as entertainment, right? They saw F1 as a spectacle, right? Like drivers weren't just drivers. They were characters in a story or a play, because sometimes F1 can get pretty theatrical. I think the more interesting bit is that there were real, veritable rivalries between teams. I mean, most notably, Mercedes and Red Bull. That was a real rivalry. They went neck to neck for years. My favorite team, McLaren, they were kind of competitive. I think before right now, we had kind of like our heyday in 2012, but I wasn't really watching back then, so I can't really claim McLaren that far. But as long as I've been a fan of them, yeah, we never were really in the fold until recently. With the new regulations, we'll see what happens. But what Liberty Media was able to do with their new broadcasting rights was they were able to portray F1 as something more than just racing. They were able to breathe life into it. But Liberty Media in 2017 was only just the start. The real kicker was in 2019 when Netflix released their famous series, Drive to Survive?
For me, it's heart attack after heart attack.
And what happened with Drive to Survive was everything that I just described, and then some. They Netflixified it. They made drama out of the smallest things. They made team rivalries almost sound like vendettas, where each race, each team was trying to pay back a different team for something that they did to a different team, right? Because it gets even more complicated when you go into the fact that, like, Williams is racing as its own team, Williams, but then they'll get their engine from Mercedes, and then McLaren will race as McLaren, but they'll get their engine from Honda, who will also supply Red Bull engines. And so it becomes this thing where it's like, we have the same engine, so we're allied, but we're not really allied, because I'm also trying to beat you so I can get more money in the World Drivers' Championship, or the Constructors' Championship, or in the World Drivers' Championship. Like, they just, and Netflix, this Drive to Survive series just did a very, very good job of creating a story out of before what felt very occulted and hidden behind, figuratively and literally, walls. But once again, same thing as before, don't take my word for it. I mean, viewership shot up almost 35% after the first season of Drive to Survive launched. The percentage of people watching F1 under the age of 35, I think it was, shot up a crazy amount, which meant what? Like, F1 was now attracting younger viewers, which is, hint, hint, wink, wink, really good for longevity, because now you're literally just raising a core group of fans that, as they age, hopefully, if they stay as interested in the sport, or even better, if they grow in interest in the sport, will give that to their kids, and then you'll have an even more larger generation of people interested in racing after them. And if you want to get really into the specifics, for the Miami Grand Prix alone, the Drive to Survive series added 360,000 new viewers. That's crazy. One of the underrated but also kind of overrated things that Drive to Survive also did was they gave it that glitz and glamour that I was talking about before, that's more prevalent in the NFL, in America anyway, that F1 before didn't really have, but now it has, and in spades. Drivers' personalities became alive, right? And in the age of streaming, having the ability to just broadcast your personality to the world effectively whenever you want was critical and major to F1's success. I mean, you have people like Max Verstappen who are live streaming almost every day from his cockpit. And funny enough, a lot of the times he's not even racing a Formula One car. He's in like a GT3 car running laps on the Nürburgring, virtually, obviously, or Spa or something like that. And then Lando Norris is also a big streamer. Charles Leclerc is a big streamer. You just have these personalities that are starting to eke out into society, and people are latching onto them and finding favor in them. I mean, I can't tell you how many of my friends who have started watching F1 on a casual level, not watching because they're really interested in tire strategy or the difference between a one stop and a two stop and learning the intricacies of an undercut versus an overcut in wet conditions. They're watching because they just heard Charles Leclerc just got married and they want to see if he wins the first race after he got married. Moving outside of the drivers, you could also see the internal politics of F1, right? Like, you could see the tension between team principal and driver when a driver who was already kind of on thin ice in terms of driving performance crashes the car. Hint, hint, wink, wink, Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, Nicholas Latifi. You saw their live instant reactions to it. You could see the mechanics, right? I knew the mechanics were important, but the training that they did and the preparation that they did, I never really knew how much went into it until Drive to Survive. And honestly, I thank Netflix for that, because that stuff is pretty cool. The other cool thing about having a favorite driver is that when they win, it feels like you win, right? Even if they don't necessarily win the race, but if you're a team that's always been bottom of the barrel and then you get a P9 or a P8, it feels good to you too, right? And then even if you're a fan of a team, if your team is successful, if your team overcomes a hurdle that it had been running into for the entire season, it feels good. I mean, hell, if I wanted to boil this entire video down into one thing on why everyone's obsessed with F1, it's because Netflix was able to give the series life and make it more than just racing. They made it a part of the cultural racing motorsport. and kind of pop cultural zeitgeist. It was finally easier to understand that losing a race wasn't just losing a race, it was losing money. Someone's livelihood was on the line, someone's bonus was on the line, someone's career was on the line. It added a level to it that it didn't have before. And it added some essence of realness that objectively has attracted millions of people. And I think as more and more people get into F1, they'll start to appreciate even the smaller nuances of like what I was talking about before with like tire changes, and understanding that like when last season, I think it was not Abu Dhabi, what race was it? The second to last race, where McLaren kept Lando and Oscar Piastri out under the safety car, but literally every other driver on the grid and their teammates pitted. And so it left Oscar and Lando out stranded with medium tires, whereas everyone else behind them, because when you pit under a safety car, it's effectively a free pit because the safety car is going so slow, you're just gonna catch back up. It gave everyone else a free pit, and now Lando and Oscar had to defend against Max Verstappen right behind them, and a couple of other drivers. I think Carlos Sainz was one of them, and then Kimi Antonelli was another one. Oscar ended up getting P2, Lando got P4, I think it was, but that was critical because at that point, they were so close in the Drivers' Championship that if Lando had gotten at that point, one place higher, if he had gotten P3, or if you want to really think about it, if he had pitted, if McLaren had pitted him, he would have been the World Championship, and the last race would have just been for funsies. But because of that critical error in strategy, it all came down to the last race for who was gonna win the World Drivers' Championship. And it's storylines like that where it's like, okay, if you're just a surface level watcher, sure, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, it's really close, just, looking at the points. But when you really understand the strategy, that you really wouldn't have that much of an appreciation for were it not for Drive to Survive, there would be so much richness of F1 that would have been lost. And I think that over time, this richness is gonna become something chased by more and more people, right? Like as you follow teams more closely and as you follow people more closely, you're gonna start to want them to win, and you're gonna wanna learn all the reasons and all the ways that they can win. Right? Like that propinquity that people are chasing between them and the drivers, sometimes bordering on being parasocial, I think is good for the sport. I think it's good for people to understand on a deeper level why things are unfolding. And Drive to Survive and all the media coverage surrounding F1, I mean how F1 just signed a deal with, not just, they did it last year, but they signed a deal with Apple TV. And Apple TV is going to be broadcasting all the races this season, taking it away from ESPN, who I think had it for like the longest time before that. Like the idea of you're cheering for a person is so powerful, not just in sports, but just in human life, like cheering for a person, wanting that person to win. Netflix has done a very good job of grabbing that and, for better or worse, selling it to us. I mean, the more important that a team is to us, the more we want them to win, the more we care about them, the more we watch, the more we tell other people to watch too. For example, when the 2022 regulations came out and it changed the ground effect that cars have with relation to like the differential, the front wing, the rear wing, the side pods, and all of that, that was a big deal. I mean, cars were complaining about this thing called porpoising, which is where like as an effect of the ground effect, the car would do this thing where it would like bounce up and down on track. I'll throw a video up. And people were like genuinely concerned that F1 drivers were like gonna break their necks because they're doing all this bouncing. And then as they go into a corner, they have to brake hard, and they have to brace their neck. And people were concerned that like drivers' heads were like gonna fly off because of all this bouncing. Like all the technical regulations that were like going into developing these cars and like dealing with the turbulent air, the dirty air from following behind a driver, dealing with like how fast DRS and the overtake button can really make you on a straightaway. Like people started caring about this stuff. And I love that, because when you start to care about something, that's when you know you're sold. And Netflix and Liberty Media have done an amazing job at selling people on not just the races, but the teams, the drivers, the team principles, the aura of F1. They're selling it, and they're doing a damn good job at it. Like the total revenue growth of F1 over the years since 2017 is crazy. Like in 2017, I think the overall revenue was about 1.87 billion. But in 2024, it's like 4 billion. Like the amount of money that's just been like pooled into funding and producing F1 content is crazy. Like sales are up for F1 merch in the United States, up 1,000% since 2018 and up 100% since 2024, while we are currently in 2026. If you ask the average person what their interest level is in F1, you are more likely to find a die-hard Lando Norris fan in 2026 than you were in 2024, than you were in 2020. Yeah, 2020. I think he entered F1 in 2020. It is undeniable that F1 is becoming very, very, very famous. And it is equally undeniable that people are becoming obsessed with the sport. And I personally am here for it, right? Like I am more interested in the engineering part of it and the technical specifications and how that, you know, relates to all the things regarding physics and how fast the car can go and how cars interact under turbulent air and all that stuff. Like I am really interested in that. But if your interest honestly stops with finding out that Oscar Piastri got a new dog or that Gabriel Bortoleto has a weird thing for like Labubus, then more power to you. I'm not gonna judge you any different. But I think the majority of people, regardless if you're in my camp or the other camp, there is an aura of F1 that is universally powerful. Like regardless of what brought you into F1, the fact of the matter is that somehow, some way, we both become enthralled by watching 18 to 23-year-olds. I mean, actually, I think Checo Perez might be in his 50s, but 18 to 23-year-olds for the most part, on average, hurling 2,000-pound aerodynamically optimized F1 cars throughout the streets of Vegas at 200 to 300 miles per hour, experiencing tens of G's going through corners and braking zones. And somehow that's just become like the thing we do on Sundays now, or Saturdays, depending on where you are at in the world or where the race is at in the world. Like, we all arrived at the same point. And while there are varying levels of interest, the fact that there is more interest on average in general is amazing. And we have people like Liberty Media and Netflix to thank for that. So thank you. It's not necessarily a problem that people are obsessed with F1. I think it's great for the sport. I just hope that over the years people don't do that same thing where it's like they ride this high because everyone else is watching it, and then over time, like, I don't know, a random driver gets canceled, or like maybe the races just aren't as fun anymore, or like big time celebrities like Matthew McConaughey and Beyonce and Shakira stop showing up, so then people stop showing up. Like, I just hope that doesn't happen, because the fact of the matter is that F1 is entertaining. It is fun. It is enjoyable. It is exciting. There are stories behind it. And I think as long as companies like Netflix continue to show the behind the scenes and to show the drama and to show the tension that exists and is very palpable and is veritable within the paddock, I think the future of F1 is in very good hands. And I think that there's, as a longtime F1 fan, I think there is a lot to look forward to. And I'm very excited to see where companies like Netflix and whoever overtakes them in the future, pun intended, where they decide to take the Drive to Survive series. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. As always, I appreciate any feedback that you guys have as I'm still growing this channel. I'm trying to find the kind of content that I like to make. As you know, I'm gonna be focusing primarily on motorsports, so you can expect me to bounce between F1, World Endurance Championships, International Motorsport Association, GT World Challenge, all those things. So yeah, if you guys thought it was interesting, let me know. If that's something that interests you, feel free to give the video a like and subscribe. And yeah, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.